Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, It's an Honor to Be Here, curated by Maria Burke and Madeline Beaumier. Today, we are thrilled to present artist David FitzSimmons. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. Please feel free to utilize that chat function to ask questions, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. And all right, welcome, David.
Well, hello and thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and it's an honor. So today I'm going to be talking about my Curious Critters series. Before I begin, I definitely want to thank the Ohio Arts Council and Rife Gallery. Kat and Panjota, thank you very much for helping put this program together this morning. And I also want to thank Maria Burke and Madeline Beaumier for their work on curating the show. If you haven't been down to the Rife Gallery to see my work, but especially the collection of all of the artists together, I encourage you to do so. It's a fabulous exhibition, and I'm honored to be able to talk about my work today. Today I'm going to be talking about my Curious Critters series. The talk is not just on animals, but on a variety of things. I'm going to tell you how I started the series, how I began as an Ohio artist who was interested in a variety of things and built a series of images that I've been able to do a variety of things with and am thankful to have been able to reach so many audiences. I'm going to talk to you about how I started taking the pictures, developed a series of books and gallery exhibits, and I hope in the process I can share with you, maybe flip a switch, some idea that helps you build your idea, whatever that thing is that you've been thinking about doing. Maybe I can help in some way facilitate you stepping out and creating a project of your own or taking the next step if you're already partway into the project. So let's get started now. I'm going to share my screen with my PowerPoint presentation and share with you the history of Curious Critters. So the series began about say, let's see if we can get this to advance here. There we go. It began about 10 years ago, and I began locally. One of the key things that I found in working in art is ask local people to get started. So you don't need to go to New York City or London. You don't need to be in Paris or some foreign exotic location or in Hollywood. You can start right in your backyard. And that's this picture you see here is taken at Gorman Nature Center. This is in Richland County, Mansfield, Ohio. And what I did was I called the local nature center that I had been working with off and on doing some presentations. I said, hey, could I come in and photograph some animals against a white background? And so you see my little light tent. Some people call this an eBay tent. It's made by Last-A-Lite. It's a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot fabric tent, and it helps create soft light. And so I set it up inside Gorman Nature Center, and I put some animals, some of their ambassador animals, reptiles and amphibians and things like that inside. And so the very first animal that I put inside my light tent at Gorman Nature Center, the very first animal in this series was this green frog. It's a big male green frog. This is the one that goes um, and this is the first image in the series. The second image I did was the American bullfrog. Actually, I just did the American bullfrog for the green frog. The American bullfrog, you hear them in summer sitting along the edge of the pond, making that deep sound. And so I started putting all kinds of cool animals right there at Gorman Nature Center, like this eastern box turtle. Typically, the males have bright red eyes, and you can start to see the approach I was using, which is to make sure you can see the eyes, kind of look into the animals' faces, and feel like you're building a personal connection. So very early on, what I wanted to do was connect my viewers, so people looking at my photographs, with the animals and try to make an affective connection. And so here, looking into those bright red eyes of the box turtle, I hope that somehow it moves us. And we'll talk about moves us to do what in a minute here. And then I started finding animals beyond Gorman Nature Center. I saw the benefits of this process of using the white background. And so whenever I found an animal or someone else found an animal, I started putting in my light tent. And in this case, my wife Olivia, who was a naturalist for the state parks and now helps with our photography and publishing business, we have three daughters, and our oldest daughter, Sarah, who at the time was maybe 6 years old, went out to our scooter. She had a little metal scooter where you kick and glide, and this gray tree frog was curled up on the handlebars. Now, at the time, it was gray. As you may know, gray tree frogs can change colors. And so I brought it into my studio, put a little piece of paper out, just copy paper, and set it down and put it in my light tent. And lo and behold, turned this brilliant green color. It folded up its arms in this almost kind of prayerful or sort of pensive pose and stared right at the camera. And this quickly became one of the key images in the series. Because we say things that are environmental are green, this was a good symbolic color. And the eyes just staring right into you, it just became a very peaceful image. And so this became one of the key images in the series. And in fact, you'll see it if you go to the Rife Gallery. So I started putting all kinds of cool animals. This is an American toad and the spotted salamander. If you don't know, the spotted salamander is the state salamander of Ohio. A group of students in Northeast Ohio, just east of Cleveland, decided we don't have a state salamander, and they designated this. The spotted salamander is beautiful, and it loves to each year migrate back to its ancestral vernal pool. And I'll tell you more about that when we get along later in the program. But I want to show you something photographically here. This is me photographing the spotted salamander in its native habitat, in its natural setting. So if you look closely, you're going to see that there's some water reflecting off the salamander and off the leaves. These are deciduous tree leaves. You're looking at maple, sugar maple leaves, American beech leaves. And so this is the kind of photography that I did before I started the Curious Critters series. Now I would like to compare that again with the white background image. This image you're looking at here shows you the salamander. He appears to be crawling out from under the leaves, which is what they do. They live underground most of the year. And in the springtime, they migrate to vernal pools. So when the first warm rain comes, which will be right about this time of the year, and by the way, by warm, I mean 33 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not warm at all, but it's enough to get the salamanders going and they head to their vernal pools. So this picture tells a lot of a story about the nighttime rain and them crawling out from underground. But if we go to the Curious Critters picture, notice how all the background is eliminated. There's no distraction. If we look at the history of art, Richard Avedon, the famous portrait artist, photographed many people. He photographed common people as well as celebrities. You probably have seen the Marilyn Monroe photograph taken against a white background done by Richard Avedon. And Richard Avedon's theory behind these photographs was that that white background is total absence. Even the presence of a black background might suggest something like shadow or cave, but with white, it's pure subject, subject alone. And so I've taken the concepts of Richard Avedon, this idea of how he did human portraiture, and carried it over to animals. And so now, with no distractions, we can focus on certain things. And there are things I think that pop out from these animals. For example, the colors, the yellow spots jumping out, the shape like the sinuous curving body of the salamander, and textures often pop out. For example, if you look at those, they look like ribs. They're actually called costal grooves. But there's one more thing that I think really stands out in these pictures. Doesn't that salamander look like he's smiling? I think we see personalities better without the distractions of the native habitats and rocks and leaves or whatever might be behind an animal. I think we can actually see the personality. So in this picture, you can see this is a juvenile um, eastern spiny softshell turtle. And again, using this white background approach, it helps us see things like that prominent snout. Now, what's amazing, you can't see here is the long, long neck. If this little turtle who lives in creeks and rivers in Ohio, if the water gets really deep, he can not just extend his nose a little way, as it'll extend way up above the water so he can breathe with his nose above the water. But if you get huge amounts of water, like a springtime rain, like we'll get this time of year, and his nose won't reach from the bottom all the way up, he can actually breathe through his skin. So it's things like that along the way that I love to learn and I share about in the books that I write. I also visit schools and love to get kids excited about nature by talking about these kinds of cool things. Kids love animals and they love all kinds of cool facts. Now, you might wonder where I get some of these subjects. I talked about working with the local nature center. I mentioned that I sometimes find animals out in nature, or our kids do. This is an eastern fox snake. They live along the shores of the Great Lakes, so you could find them very close to the edge of Lake Erie. This particular one is an ambassador animal. There's a pretty well-known naturalist named Kristen Stanford who works for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and she was the one who very carefully and very excitedly helped go to fishermen and other people along Lake Erie and help preserve the Lake Erie water snake, which was endangered, and its numbers have now increased. So she carries snakes to many programs, and when she was coming near my home to Mohican State Park, I said, "Hey, Kristen, can I borrow this fox snake for a few hours to photograph it?" And so, knowing that this snake had been handled and knowing that it was a constrictor, I figured it might be comfortable if I wrapped it around in a coil. And so I did that. I leaned into the light tent, I curled it around under my hand, and then I released my hand and quickly took 3 pictures before it uncoiled itself. All kinds of animals. This is a crayfish from my parents' farm. It was in the pond. And a jumping spider. Now, some people may be fearful of spiders. This little guy's about the size of your thumbnail. Take a look at your thumbnail and think about a spider about that size. If you haven't seen jumping spiders, they're amazing. They have actually 8 sets of eyes. There are 8 total eyes. Some spiders only have 2 eyes, but many have 8. You can see in this picture 2 large ones in the front, 2 additional ones on the side, and then there are 4 more on the back of its head. Amazingly, these spiders can jump about 100 times the length of their bodies. Now you're looking here at a Baltimore checker spot butterfly. And I want to tell you several things about this. This is an animal that I did capture out in the wild, and I want to talk about the process of handling these animals. If you look very closely at your screen, if you look behind the antennae on the leading edge of the wing, you may see a little dot. That's a drop of water. And if you start looking more closely, you may see a few more on there. I went down to the Malabar Farm Jungle Brook Trail. It's a wetland trail, and there's a portion of it that goes on a boardwalk through the main part of the wetland. And each spring, around the beginning of June here in Richland County, these Baltimore checker spots metamorphose from their caterpillars. They are associated, just like monarchs are with milkweed, they're associated with a plant called turtlehead. And if you go down, you can see the caterpillars going through their various instars. But at the right moment, on an early morning, you may see, like I did here, a Baltimore checker spot that has just metamorphosed. It had actually not flown yet. And so what you're seeing are the dewdrops on its wings. And I'm showing you that because I actually went down and captured this butterfly, put it in a small plastic Ziploc bag, which I blew some air into, carefully carried it back a half-mile on the trail, drove the couple miles back to my house, photographed it, and I had been so careful with it, I had preserved those dewdrops on its wings. And that's a way of trying to share with you the way that I try to be really careful with the animals that I work with, to respect their health and take care of them. And then, of course, when I finished with this butterfly, I released it back into its native environment. So the utmost care with the animals I get out in nature, and then I work with a lot of zoos, nature centers, and rehab clinics. Now, I'm always trying to do something different photographically. So far, everything I've shown you has been pretty sharp. But with this butterfly, I thought, would it be possible to do a slow motion image? And so with this black swallowtail, I slowed down the camera shutter speed enough that you would have the body still in focus, but the wings showing that graceful flight and motion. Now, you may be looking at this and wondering what this is. Some of you may have figured it out already. This is a bioluminescent insect. Yes, it's a lightning bug. And when I was photographing, it's actually not a true bug. It's actually in the beetle family. When I was photographing, it had its elytra. All beetles have elytra, those wing covers, the ones you see at the top, down over its body. And it wasn't very interesting. But the heat of my studio lights made this start to want to fly. And I saw, if I could get that picture right at takeoff, and so I shot a number of images until I got this kind of ballet-like pose with it just starting to take off. And of course, I love other kinds of insects. If you take a close look at this red flat bark beetle, if you hold up your thumb again, it's about the width of your fingernail. But if you zoom in closely, using careful techniques, you can see other animals on its back. In fact, these are mites. They're related to spiders, and there are actually 6 of them here on its back. So I'll give you a second to glance at it. There are a couple up on that top wing where the elytra is up. There's one on the back of the head, right behind the eye, and of course the big one and a small one there in the middle. So there are a total of 6 on this insect. Of course, I do other animals like birds. I work with a lot of rehab clinics for the birds, the Ohio Bird Sanctuary, Bruckner Nature Center near Dayton, Ohio, and Troy, Back to the Wild near Sandusky, Ohio, and others, not only in Ohio, but across the country. Blue jays, Baltimore Orioles. This is a cedar waxwing. That's the image you would probably see in a bird book. And that's a bad feather day for a cedar waxwing. Now, other animals, raptors like this eastern screech owl, the red phase, or other predators like this big brown bat. Now, I tried to take all kinds of pictures, and I thought, could I get a picture of fish? And so I was at the time teaching at Ashland University. I was a professor there for 10 years, a professor in the English department, working with language arts students and teachers. And I went to the biology department. I said, hey, could I photograph your goldfish? And so I worked on a technique, and it really wasn't that hard. All I had to do was put an aquarium into my tank, into my light tent, and wait for the fish to swim around. And that created that white background behind it and good illumination. And so I started doing all kinds of animals in water, like this predaceous diving beetle. Now, these guys can fly. I could have taken a picture of it in the air. They do crawl on the land, but look here in the water, how those legs act like oars. You can see the little bristles sticking out to help it dive down into the water. Now, I do travel all over, and I've been fortunate enough to photograph lots of animals. And as you might imagine, sometimes it gets kind of interesting. I had 6 baby red squirrels at Bruckner Nature Center in Troy, Ohio. They have a very nice rehab clinic there. And so I tried to put all 6 squirrels in the light tent. That didn't work, but I am going to show you a video here of what can happen when you get wild animals into your light tent. So you're looking at my setup. I'm in a back room at the rehab clinic in the nature center. And I have one squirrel here. Now, I want to pause for a second and give you a photographic tip. When you photograph animals, animals that have eyes, make sure the eyes are visible and the eyes are in focus. Now you're going to see a good shot right here in a second. He's posed right there with his feet up like he was eating a nut or some sort of a fruit. And so what I'll often do if I think I have a good pose is I'll pause and I'll zoom in on the back of the camera. And what I'm checking for is to make sure that the eye is in focus. And so you can see right there, I knew I had a good pose. He looked like he was eating a nut or a seed or something. And so then I will continue doing the photo session, but I know that I've gotten a good shot. So I thought I'd go get another red squirrel. While I was fixing the paper, I lined the back of the tent with paper in case they soil it. The little guy climbed me like a tree. So I thought, well, I got to get this guy down and put him back into the paper. But as you might know, they have a pretty good grip on things. And so once you start handling these animals, you never know what's going to happen. This guy didn't want to let go of my shirt. I finally peeled him off my shirt, went to put him down the back of the light tent. And every time I tried to set him down, he'd keep climbing back up onto my hand. And I'd try to set him down again, and he'd go back up onto my. It was kind of like Velcro. He just kind of stuck there. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to peel him off and kind of push him down back here. And so I like him in the back of the light tent. The lights, well, then he gave me his backside. So I thought, all right, let's go get another baby squirrel. So I put him back in the back of the tent there, and he started coming forward. I'm like, no, 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 you're the subject. You need to go back there. Well, he was going to have none of that. He said, I don't want to be the subject. I want to be the photographer. So what you're seeing here is very common animals going all over the place. And I'm going to do a little thing here for you. In a second, I'm going to count down from 5 to 0. And I want you to ask yourself what you see first in the next picture. It's okay that your screen is blank right now because I want you to pay attention as soon as the next image comes up. So when I get to 0, pay attention to what your eye looks at first in this next photo. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Did you look at the eye first? I'm going to bet that almost every one of the viewers watching this program, your eye immediately went to the squirrel's eye. And I told you while I was beginning that little photo session, that little video, to pay attention to the eyes. Make sure when you're photographing animals, the eyes are in focus and they're visible. And that's because you need to know what your viewers are going to do. That is, as a photographer, you're paying attention to what your viewers' response to your images is going to be. And so most viewers will pay attention to the eye first. That's what we as humans do. The vision is such an important part of our perception. So my tip to you when you're photographing human subjects, dogs, cats, whatever has eyes, make sure that that subject has the eyes clearly visible, pull hair back, whatever it is, and then make sure the eye is in focus in your photograph. So at this point, I had done a number of animal images, and I thought, what could I do with these? And so I started thinking about, could I create a book with these? And I worked with a lot of kids. My mom was a specialist in My mom, Judy FitzSimmons, taught in the Mansfield City Schools, was a specialist in children's literature. And I looked at lots of kids' books from Denise Fleming, an Ohio author, to, of course, Dr. Seuss and Eric Carle. And one of my mentors, Carl Sams, a great photographer in the greater Detroit area. Could I create a book something like this? So I started working on a children's book. And so I thought maybe I could put some animals in, one on each page, and ask some questions like, do soft-shell turtles live in water or on land? Or maybe take notes like Dora the Explorer as she goes out and looks at these various animals. I finally settled on an approach for my draft book. I would put two animals, one on one page, one on the other, and compare and contrast them. So the American toad and the American bullfrog are somewhat similar. In fact, they're almost kind of matching animals, but there are some differences. So the American toad, my skin is dry and covered with warts, and the American bullfrog, my skin is smooth and moist. And so I wrote over half the book like this. And I thought, well, I'm going to show it to my brother and see what he thinks of it. So I called my brother Tom and I said, hey, what do you think of this book? And we sat down together and looked at it. And he said, well, I think the animal pictures are fabulous. They're just so much fun, all this personality. But he said, the writing's a little, and the word he used was clinical. And I think that was his polite way of saying a little bit boring. He said, could you make it a little more interesting? What if, Tom said, the animals got a chance to speak to the readers? What if you gave them their own voices? In fact, since they have their own personalities, give them their voices and give some of them an edge. Give them some attitude. Well, I thought about that and I thought that sounds like a pretty good idea. I'll try to make the book more interesting. And so I went back and I rewrote the pieces. And so I started giving them personality. And so now that bullfrog says, "Rurum, rurum. I love sitting by the pond and singing for the ladies." And so I started making revisions to the book. And so I want to talk for a second about revisions because this is really important. Those of you out there who are thinking about you'd love to write a book someday, um, it takes an immense amount of revisions. When I visit schools, I'll be visiting a school near Cleveland tomorrow, and one of the things I'll share with the students, and they're usually amazed with, I ask them, how many times do you think I modify each one of these? How many times do I go back and revise each one of these narratives? And I typically get a hand raised and one person says once or twice, maybe somebody says 5 or 10 times. And when I keep them going up and I say higher and higher, and we get 250 to 300 times, the students' mouths are kind of agape and they don't realize. And I point out to them, one of the reasons that I've been successful as an author is the large amount of revision. And it's not revision on my own. I work with lots of specialists. I start with family members. My wife is a naturalist and works well reading with kids. I work with teachers and librarians, scientists, all kinds of people who can help me, and I ask lots of opinions. And in fact, you might wonder, do I work with kids? When our daughter was in second grade, my first book came out, and so I went to the teacher who was a friend of mine, and I said, could I work with your class? And so we actually used the student group as a sounding board for ideas on how to develop the book. And so you're seeing revisions here, another revision, and another revision, and another revision, until we get the final layout for the book. So each one of these little narratives that could be 50 to 100 or 150 words, you're looking at revisions of 250 or 300 times on each one of these. The cover, this was my draft idea of the cover, and then I hired an expert, a world-class designer who worked with Dorling Kindersley, the white background books, and worked with George Lucas and Charles Schultz. I hired Ian Morris to do the book design, and this was the cover that he came up with for the first one. It's been the guiding principle for our book, and in fact, he won a National Book Award for his cover design for the book as well. I thought I might take a second and I'd read a few of these to you because I'd like you to hear what it's like for the animals, giving them their own voices. So I'm going to start with the southern flying squirrel. Now, before I do this, I need to tell you that the southern flying squirrel is one of the most high energy animals that I've ever been around. And so that was one of my goals in writing this, is to try to make the narrative sound high energy. Southern flying squirrel. Yes, I can fly. Just a second. Okay, wait. Yes, I'm a bit jumpy, jittery. Owls hunt me, you see? So I climb a tree, go out on a limb, flap the skin between my legs. I jump, then I gracefully glide. Sleep? Me? No, never. Well, okay, during the day, inside a hollow tree, gotta fly. Bye. And so that's my idea of short sentences, short staccato sentences to help create the sense of speed. To which the big brown bat replies, Gliding? The little squirrel calls that flying? Pfft, that's more like a long leap. I can really fly. And then he goes on to describe how he uses skin spread across his wings, his fingers, to act like wings to fly up and down and left and right. And so by facing them off against the center of the page, there's actually a fold there in the page. It's what technically is called the gutter. The two of them are facing across that fold in the page, arguing, having a little bickering about which one is the better flyer. And this page is all about coloration. We've talked about the gray tree frog changing color. And for this one, I thought I would do a very unusual katydid. Now, if you're familiar with katydids, you probably know that they're usually green, but this one was pink. She was found in western Ohio in the Killdeer Plains wildlife area, and she was bright bubblegum pink. And in fact, these katydids can often be, with some regularity, orange or yellow as well. But that is a very rare color. I was with an entomologist for Ohio State University at the time. His name is Dave Horn, and he had seen 8 of these in his career as an insect specialist. So all kinds of natural history that I put in the back of the book. I try to share more information so that you can learn a little bit more about each animal. And then the question my wife asked was, how could we show the size of these animals? You see, against the white background, you don't have the leaves and rocks and other reference points to tell how large the animals are. So on this 8.5 by 11 page, which is spread out into 2, so you've got about a 22-inch spread page here, you can see the life-size silhouettes of each of the animals. And then we turned it into a game. What do the different colors represent? We use the shapes of the animals to make, can you identify each animal? And then one animal's shape has changed. I'll leave that up to you. You can try to figure it out, get a copy of the book and see what you think. Well, the book came out and it won 6 National Book Awards. I had set a goal when I went to publish this book. I wanted to sell 50,000 copies of the book in the first 2 years. Well, this was a darn good start. It came out, got national awards, and within 2 years, it hadn't sold 50,000 copies. It had sold over 90,000 copies. And so, as you might imagine, I started thinking, why not do a more book? So I did another book. I started looking for more critters. My wife was cleaning dishes at the kitchen sink and looked out the window and said, "Hey, Dave, come here." And there was this green lacewing outside the kitchen window. We went down to mom and dad's farm. Grandma and grandpa lived just down the road, and sitting there in the yard was this baby robin. Now, it's not true if you touch a baby robin, the mother will abandon it. In fact, I scooped it up, brought it home, photographed it, walked back to my parents' place and released it. And in fact, when I released it, I gave it just a little bit of squeeze so it let out a little, just a little call, which it did. And immediately the parent came down to it on the ground. And so it was just fine. So that's a baby robin. I don't keep track of a lot of statistics, but I do kind of keep track of what I call the ppm. That's poops per minute in my light tent. And the geese, by far and away, take the cake. They generally go to the bathroom in my light tent about every 20 seconds, 3 ppm. That's a lot of changing paper in the light tent. And of course, toads. What's better than one big fat toad? Well, a couple big fat toads. I started putting more than one animal in my light tent. And I started looking for different colors. What's brown and really cool? How about the snail? How about something green and very curious? When you zoom in close on the inchworm, it looks otherworldly. How about something blue? The indigo bunting in Ohio. That's not a pigment color. It's a color that where the light is bent. It's refracted, and so it's an optical color, the beautiful colors of the male indigo bunting. Well, we need some other colors. How about something red? Well, in Ohio, that makes a whole lot of sense to do the male northern cardinal. How about something pink? I traveled to the Jacksonville Zoo, and there I photographed this 9-banded armadillo. And while I was there, I asked them a question. I said, "Hey, you don't happen to have an alligator I could photograph, do you?" And they did. They had a baby alligator about 24 inches long, and he turned into the cover of my second book, Curious Critters Volume 2. I love the way he's got his mouth open. He looks a little bit aggressive, but he also looks like he's talking to you and letting you in on his little world. Recently, I made a change. I changed that book's cover from Curious Critters Volume 2 to Curious Critters Backyard Animals. And some of you may be familiar with my books, and you may have an older copy of Curious Critters Volume 2. There are a few changes inside, but I'm always looking at my series and making changes, making edits, thinking what can I change to make the book better or different. And so there's the new book, Curious Critters. Volume 2 is now Curious Critters Backyard Animals. I thought I'd read a couple of these to you. For this one, knowing that the nine-banded armadillo had started in Mexico and is slowly, over time, has been migrating into the United States, I thought, why not put a little Spanish in here? Buenos dias, amigos. Yo soy un armadillo. That means I'm a little armored one. And then he goes on to talk about his rooting around into the yards and things like that, trying to find insects. It's interesting, I found as I've traveled that I photographed armadillos both in Texas and in Florida. And generally speaking, Floridians don't really care for their armadillos, where Texans take them as a badge of honor. They're something that they consider to be very important to their state. So it's interesting how regionally people's views on wildlife can be quite different. One of my favorites to write was the Sidewinder. Now, before I read the Sidewinder 2, I want to point out to you that they occur in the desert. They're not found here in Ohio, but in the desert Southwest. These are all North American animals. And one of the key things is that coloration. It helps them blend in. So I thought to myself, I wonder if I could come up with something that would be interesting about the way they seem to disappear into the sand. Hocus pocus, rodents focus. Each and every day I perform my wild desert magic. Here's my routine. Wiggling into the sand, I vanish from view, disappearing from unsuspecting rats and mice. Only my eyes and the top of my sandy-colored body show. When midday prey scampers my way, presto changeo! I transform dry sand into Sidewinder alakazam. With a flash of fangs, the illusion is over. Simsalabim. The trick is blending in. Now, if you look at that, there are only about 50, 60 words on the page, and you might wonder, how long does it take to write one of these books? I mean, if you didn't know this, picture books generally only have 32 pages. So do the quick math here, 100 words per page. The intro page with the copyright, all said, doesn't seem like it would take very long. However, what I would point out here is every single word matters on this page. To write that page and come up with words like sim, salabim, I consulted a 1,000-page compendium of magician's terms. In other words, the writing, because every word has to be so precise and count, actually takes a long time. And so the writing of one of these books takes about a year. Even though they're only 32 pages, it takes quite a bit of time to write and then do the edits 200, 300 times for each one of these. You might wonder why I ended the book with the striped skunk and the great horned owl. Those are the last two in the second book, and the answer is that the great horned owl is the only regular predator of the striped skunk. You'll also notice that the striped skunk is a limerick. I tend to put at least one or two poems in every one of my books. Limerick by S. Skunk. My skunk reputation's maligned. On bees and small rodents I dine. And that spray that you fear coming out of my rear, I think odoriferously fine. I don't know about you all, but I'm not sure it's odoriferously fine. But it is the way the striped skunk is able to defend himself and at least has some hope against that very silent hunter, the great horned owl. Again, in the back of this book, we put more information about the animals, another silhouette page. And concurrently, I began work on Curious Critters Marine, animals that live in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, the Gulf of Mexico. I went to Florida and photographed this loggerhead sea turtle on Marathon Key at the Turtle Hospital. They gave me 5 minutes, just 5 minutes with this little baby. I went to the Mystic Connecticut Aquarium and photographed the blue lobster, the rare American blue lobster. This was a very large lobster. And in fact, I had a reunion with him on the set of the Weather Channel at Rockefeller Center a couple of years later during an interview on Earth Day. That was on the Al Roker show. I flew to Alaska to photograph the tufted puffin. In fact, I couldn't buy my ticket to go to Alaska until we knew the puffins had their tufts, because they actually don't grow the tuft until breeding the breeding season, and that can change each year because these actually live outside, even at the aquarium. And so I had to wait, and then I flew up and photographed the tufted puffin. I sent one of my 3 light tents, and they trained it to get in the light tent. So actually, when I got there, it wasn't that hard. We just set the light tent up, and the puffins were comfortable. To this day, that particular light tent still smells like the fish they used to entice them into the light tent. As I was doing the picture books, I had a number of people say, what do you have for the younger kids? What do you think of doing books on the individual states? Kind of like baby's first field guide to your state. And so I did 2 books initially, Ohio and Michigan. I looked at common animals that you would see in the backyards around the state. So screech owl, listen for my nighttime screeching in Ohio. Or the mallard duck, listen for me calling quack quack in Michigan. I put maps of the United States and showed where the state is to help contextualize the animals. Early childhood experts say many kindergartners coming to school actually can't find their state on a map. So working with education specialists helped create books that will hopefully educate kids as well as delight them. And so we started working on other books. There's one on Florida and books on Texas, again, using more maps. And to this date, there are now 17 different states, ranging from in the Midwest to the East, Southeast, and as far west now as Texas and California. If you don't see a state you're interested, stay tuned. I'm continuing to add to that list. The most recent being the California. I want to tell you about a couple other books I've worked on. I mentioned my love for salamanders. I do some books that don't feature my photography, but I work with other artists. I did a book on salamanders and their annual trek to the vernal pools, the small depressions where they lay their eggs. Worked with a Connecticut artist, Michael DiGiorgio, showing how, in my story and his pictures, how the animals come out from their underground burrows and go to these pools right about this time of the year, February and March in Ohio, and they lay their eggs. They come together in large groups, sometimes 1,000 or more salamanders in the vernal pool, and then they head back out. The eggs develop in the vernal pool. And of course, I put more information in the books about how vernal pools are formed and the life cycle. As a teacher, I'm always interested in the opportunity to share more natural history information, more things with my readers. And then I worked with an Ohio illustrator, Richard Cowdery. Some of you may know him from his work with Marley. There was a whole series, including movies, made about Marley. But Richard Cowdery's done tons and tons of books, and so he and I decided to partner. We worked shoulder to shoulder on Wake 'em the Rooster Up All Night, a story about a rooster who has his days and nights mixed up. And of course, that messes up the whole barnyard where nobody can sleep well. It's a story trying to figure out how you find balance in your life. And of course, as a good children's book, it's a good bedtime story talking about how you find that balance and can get back to sleep and relax. So I worked on other books where they're not featuring my photography, but I want to return back to some more of the projects then that with my photography. I thought, well, if I've got these Ohio board books, how about a couple with specific animal groups? So I did birds, all kinds of birds that are common to Ohio and North America, some seacoast birds, um, animals all across North America, but common ones. The focus here is not on what's exotic, but what we can find right in our backyards. If you wondered how I photographed the herring gull, that's an Ohio image. I was on one of the ferries going out to the Lake Erie Islands. We had an overcast day, as we're wont to do in Ohio from time to time, and this herring gull flew over, and I thought, there you go, that looks like it was taken right inside my light tent. Essentially, it was taken in a light tent, a giant cloud-covered sky light tent. So that's the photographic secret behind the herring gull photo. And then I released Curious Critters Raptors, focusing just on owls and hawks and other raptors, like this cute little northern saw-whet owl, about the size of a soda can that was photographed at Back to the Wild, which is near Sandusky, Ohio. The bald eagle on the left is a juvenile at the Ohio Bird Sanctuary. I've been taking her birthday photograph each year. And in the third year, that was a great image to use because it shows how the bald eagle begins to get its white coloration in that third year. And so I like to show kids the comparison between the juvenile. Just like kids change over time, so do animals. And it's important to document that for the kids. Here's another example, the American kestrel. That's what the nestling looks like. You can see some of the same colors, some of the bands around the eyes, but definitely changes from the very young American kestrel to its adult stage. And of course, it's often confusing for many people between the barn owl and barred owl. This 2-page spread gave an opportunity to show the differences and similarities between these two birds. The barn owl, less common in Ohio. Pesticides, problems with the environment have reduced the numbers of barn owls as well as habitats. The barred owls are the much more common and what most people will see, but there are some barn owls in Ohio. And then I decided to work on something a little different. How about dogs? And so, ranging from this corgi on the cover to common breeds you might see or more unusual ones. I love the little mustache on that wire-haired dachshund. And of course, one of the most tricky things to do as a photographer is to photograph a white subject against a white background. And so that takes some very careful planning. For these photographs, I actually built a large rig, a 10 by 10 rig that I took into dog shows, pet stores, um, pet shows, and photographed a wide range of dogs. It's even interesting sometimes you look at these dogs, and as some of you may know, when you get to meet the owners, sometimes the dogs look a lot like their owners. And so it's kind of fun to see the dogs and see the owners and get to understand the dog world. And I always joke about the one on the left here with the Labrador, about choosing your friends. These little puppies were beautiful little dogs here in near where I live in Richland County, a breeder who works a lot with dogs used for the police. And of course, photographically, when you look at some of these images like the Great Danes on the right, the image works. And I think the key thing I would say that makes these two images work are the few touching points between these siblings. Those are two young Great Danes. Their tails almost appear to touch at the bottom. I think it's actually tail to leg. Their hips touch, but where those two ears come together almost looks like they're holding hands. And so those two siblings, it's the little details in the photographs like that that I'm watching for when I produce these images. And of course, if you are a cat lover, stay tuned. I've started work on photographing cats as well, so you may see a cat book soon. Now, I wanted to tell you about an exciting project that came along during the pandemic. I was contacted by a representative from Chick-fil-A and said, would you be interested in working on kids' meals for the Chick-fil-A stores? And so we actually produced 5 books, created miniature versions, modifications. They're not the same as the books we did here. And those 5 little books featured animals and gave them a chance to talk to the kids. These were in little shrink wrap packages that came with the kids' meals at Chick-fil-A. They came out in fall of last year. And those books included not just the covers you see here, but inside similar kinds of conversations and chances to talk. And the Candy Stripe Shrimp, I enjoyed doing some jokes. What kind of stories do Candy Stripe Shrimp tell? Colorful tales. What do you call a small crustacean? A shrimp. And I included new animals that weren't in some of the bigger books that I did, combined some new images that I did, and again, a few jokes. Here's the striped skunk. What do you say when you find a skunk? Eureka! And so it was fun putting together these small books, and they did a fabulous job. They ended up publishing 5 million copies of these. And not only were there the little narratives in the book, but little games trying to identify the parts of these animals, which animals which. You can see at the bottom there are answers. And then we created sticker pages. And so these came with a whole bunch of activities so that while the parents were doing whatever at the restaurant or take them home, they'd have activities where they could learn a little bit more about the animals, the groups of animals, and there's the sticker page that goes with that, so kids could then have an activity as well. So this was a great honor to be involved in this process, and I'm thankful for sharing so much nature, how Chick-fil-A made this available to kids all across the United States. And I want to mention that I do in-person programs as well as these online programs, and I do events, in-person events. I was at a Christmas program where I was signing books in Columbus, Ohio, and this author, Cheryl Benner, who had never written a book before, came up and said, I'd love to do a children's book. And I said, well, I would love to help you do a children's book. And so she told me the story about Gabalucci the wolf. It was an oral storytelling that her grandfather had used, and she said, I'd like to put it to pictures and turn it into a book. And so I contacted my friend Jeffrey Ebler, the artist in Cincinnati, who has 50 plus books. And I said, I've got an opportunity for you. And so we worked on Wolves Aren't Welcome, about a wolf who goes out and tries to find a new home. And along the way, people tell him that wolves aren't welcome. And he learns that he can actually make friends. And in the end, it's a great story that has a beautiful turn at the end. And so Cheryl Benner, with her book, Wolves Aren't Welcome, won 3 National Book Awards. So my message to you is there are people out there who can help you with whatever your dream is. Cheryl walked up to me and said, I love your book. I'd love to to write my own book, and we ended up publishing a book together, and she's won 3 national book awards. I want to finish not with a Curious Critters image, but as a segue using the more recent Aurora Borealis, the northern lights in Ohio. These are photographs from right outside my front door of several trees. But I want to point out, I live in an agriculture area. I'm out in the country near Malabar Farm State Park, and you see the 2 cows down there. And so that's a segue into the next book project that I'm working on, and that is baby farm animals. These are Mangalitsa piglets. If you're not familiar with a Mangalitsa pig, it's an Eastern European pig that has huge amounts of fat, but it's known for being hairy. And so they look sort of like sheep and sort of like pigs and sort of like goats and sort of like cows, and they're a whole lot of fun. So stay tuned on my upcoming project with baby farm animals. If you want to know more about the work I do or keep in touch with me, some social media contacts, Facebook, FitzSimmons David. Check me out on Instagram at davidfitzsimmons.photos. And if you want to know more about the Curious Critters, there is a huge amount of information. There's videos, me reading more animals, educational materials. If you're a teacher or know a teacher, pass this along to them. There are all kinds of things. During the pandemic, we developed a lot of homeschool materials. So go to curiouscritters.com. If you would like to be on my newsletter, and I have a monthly newsletter, you can sign up for that, subscribe at the Curious Critters website. And if you want to reach out to me, that email will reach me directly, just davefitzsimmons@yahoo.com. I'm going to take some questions here in a second, but I again want to express my extreme thankfulness to the Ohio Arts Council and the Reif Gallery. Thank you very much to Madeline and Maria for curating the show at the gallery. And I want to thank Kat and Pangiota for putting together today's program. To conclude, I want to tell you that I am an Ohioan who had a dream. And what I did was start looking for ways that here in Ohio, I could find people who could help me develop that dream. And this project has been very much a Buckeye project with so many hands involved. How do you do it? You ask. You find somebody and ask. Maybe you ask me for help. Maybe you ask Kat for help. Maybe you ask Maria. Maybe you ask your local librarian, a teacher, a friend, someone in your church or your synagogue or whatever it is. Ask somebody for help. You'll be surprised how many people would love to help you achieve your dream.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, David.
You're welcome. I'd love to answer
So,
some questions, Kat.
yeah, absolutely. So, just a reminder, pop those questions into the chat if you have them. And so we have one question. What animal do you think is most underappreciated?
That's an interesting question. People always want to know what I think was my favorite animal, and I often tell them I really enjoyed the octopuses, but I don't think they're underappreciated. I think we've had a lot of media attention for octopuses lately. What I do think is that snakes are vastly underappreciated. They're one of my favorite animals, and if you think
Mhm.
about it, their locomotion, the ability to move, climb trees, the many ways they get around. Think about how you would try to move if you had no arms and no legs and the fact that they can slither and do so many amazing things and capture food. So I think if you step back for a second, many people have fear of snakes, but if you put that on hold for a second and think about the incredible abilities that snakes have, given that they don't have what we often take for granted, our appendages, they're one of the, from my point of view, one of the most amazing. The other I would say are insects. I think we are so far above insects. I mean that physically, like we stand, 5, 6 feet tall, and we look down on something the size of our fingernail. Maybe we discover one on the kitchen counter or something. But that world of insects is so amazing. And the image I showed of the red flat bark beetle is just tip of the iceberg. You get down to that level and you magnify it, and there are animals living on animals, and you start looking at the worlds they live in. We know bees and we know their social behavior, but when you start looking at the vast ways that insects, like the diving beetle, and its ability to fly, crawl, and dive in water, these beetles can carry their own air bubble like a scuba diver. It's those types of things as I do this research. In my background, I'm not a scientist, so I actually have a master's and PhD in English. But when I look at these science things and read about them, it just blows me away. It's so amazing. And I would mention here in the context of Ohio, sometimes people think, well, if you're a nature photographer, you need to be in California or Colorado. Ohio and the Midwest has the greatest biodiversity in the country. We have so many animals around us. If you walk out your front door on a spring day, you might see 25 species in 10 minutes. It might take 2 or 3 days climbing a mountain in Colorado to come across that many species. And so in Ohio, if you just get down on your knees and look at the insects, there are so many cool things going on. So I think insects would be also on that list, Kat.
Wonderful. So you just mentioned something that kind of piques my interest. You talked about having a master's and PhD in English, and you are a wildlife photographer and author. Um, can you talk a little bit about how you have the courage to pursue interests that are perhaps different than what you thought your path would be?
That's a very good and interesting question. I have certainly learned in the 50 some years that I've been on this planet that there are no scripts, that life has lots of interesting turns. And I think one of my biggest personal challenges has been accepting that life is full of all kinds of unique opportunities that you have to be ready for. And so I'm a planner. I'm always looking at calendars and figuring what I'm doing 6 months and 12 months from now. But what I find is that it's often not what I expected where I end up. And that's a photographic story. I will go out into the field thinking I'm going out today to take pictures of mushrooms, fungi, and what I find is a leaf on the ground that fascinates me for the next 2 hours. Or I think that I'm going to a location to photograph, say, a particular species of bird at a rehab clinic. And what I end up finding is a domesticated chicken that just jumps out at me and says, I'm here for my picture today. And so I've learned to try to be flexible to what the world brings. And this has been especially true in the last few years. You probably don't know, Kat, or some of you in the audience may know, we were hit by a tornado in 2022. And that vastly changed what I was doing in ways that required me to rethink how and what the benefit is that I've been able to reinvent certain things that I'm doing. And so I'm constantly rethinking. So in terms of my background in master's and PhD in English, I did teach at Ashland University and I've taught at Ohio State and Cornell. I've had an opportunity to do a lot of very unique academic things. And what I've tried to do is parlay what I learned in that academic training. And my specialty is narrative theory. I studied William Faulkner and his narratives and how they work, the techniques he used. And I've used that in several ways. One, it makes me really investigate how my pictures are able to tell stories or convey information in the same way that we use metaphors or tropes or whatever kinds of techniques we use in language. You can do similar kinds of things in photographs with colors and textures and lack of background. And then I've been able to use the ideas that I've learned in that more academic realm. William Faulkner is famous for his voices. He captures how people talk. So you can see that in my animal stories. I've tried to give each animal its own voice. I like to think in kind of a sophisticated way that my children's books are sort of Faulkner for kids. And I mean that in no way to be belittling in any way. I mean that there's no reason we can't challenge kids to recognize complex voice patterns. They do. Kids are great at imitating things. And so I try to give parents, grandparents, teachers, whoever's reading these books with kids an opportunity to be able to explore. There's nothing better than a children's book that you can return to over and over again. And I'm sure you see that in books that you read. Sure that you see that in movies that you watch over and over again, or a piece of artwork that you want to go back and see again and again in a gallery exhibit or a permanent collection. So that's those are some of the things that I've taken. So I do see that my background has brought me to an interesting place, not quite where I thought I'd be. I had been a professor for 10 years, but just decided to change directions. And so it's been a little different. Yeah,
Yeah. David, how did you get your start in photography? Have you always been interested in photography, or did you catch the bug?
that's an interesting question. It is a bit hereditary. My grandfather was an exceptional photographer. I don't have many of his photographs left, but I have a couple hanging in my bedroom, one beautifully lit image of the nation's capital. Um, the My dad continued that photographic tradition. And so when I was born shortly, into my childhood, there were photographic tools sitting around, an old Argus C3 camera. And being a very physically interested person, I like to get my hands on things. The mechanical shutters and springs and stuff amazed me, and the concept of light and how I could take multiple exposures. So I used that old Argus C3 and I'd put it on a tripod and I'd set the shutter for half the right speed and I'd take a picture, I'd set it again for half the right speed. So now I've got the right amount of light. And for the second picture, I'd do the self timer. I'd run into the picture and put myself in there. And so then I'd appear as a ghost and all that kind of experimenting. I had tools early on and found that it was fascinating. Fast forward, I'm working with film now in my, say, teens and 20s, and I'm getting frustrated because I want to do something with that film, but I have to give it to somebody, a lab, and the lab may or may not do something right with it. And I was getting ready to go out west on the first big trip with my wife after we were married. And a lady at a lab in Ontario, Ohio, here near Mansfield, said to me, well, if I were going to Colorado, I would take a digital camera. And I went home and I thought, well, that's an interesting thing. I've always shot film and I have beautiful film equipment. And so I went and I got a digital camera, paid at the time an exorbitant fee for a very small megapixel camera. And I took a picture of a mushroom with my good equipment, all my special film equipment. And then I used that new picture and I blew them up to the same size enlargement. And the digital picture just amazed me. And then I realized I can control all of the parameters on my computer. And I should say, when I was in high school, I published computer programs. So I was beginning down that sort of computer geek avenue. And so I had a lot of background in computers. I'm not an expert today, but I certainly had some experience. And so that was a pivotal moment in my career, realizing I don't need the chemicals anymore. And of course, that now becomes very environmental, but it allowed me to have much greater control. And if you look at these white background images, they require very careful control of the contrast and things like that. And so I've carefully fine-tuned that computer background, my processing, to help build the program as well.
That's wonderful. And so I think a natural last question to ask you would be, clearly you have a deep affinity and a love of nature and the environment. Um, and so could you speak on that a little bit and the importance of creating work that highlights and uplifts and educates about the importance of this?
Thanks for asking that, Kat. Absolutely. I work in the area of biophilia. There's a large movement in the United States called the Children in Nature Movement, and they're focused on biophilia, which means basically the love of nature. And more and more research is finding that kids, and not just kids, but adults as well, are more healthy when they're in good contact with nature. And that could be really simple. It could be going outside and sitting under a tree. It's as simple as going to a dentist's office and having the dentist put a picture of trees in front of your dental chair, and you can relax more while you're getting your teeth worked on. And so the work that I do, and my wife Olivia, who now doesn't work for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, but instead we co-own Wild Iris Publishing LLC. We create books for kids and families trying to connect them with nature. And so our goal is that maybe grandma will pick up a book at one of our shows or go on the website. By the way, you can get them at curious-critters.com. Just check out the shop there. Maybe somebody picks up a book and sends it to a kid. The kid sits down with mom or grandma and reads it and says, hey, let's go for a walk. And the next day they go outside and they look for maybe the cardinal or the spot a groundhog or something, and they make that connection. And so you don't have to be outside every minute, but what we're trying to do is connect kids through reading with that natural experience and hopefully create more holistic and healthy and thoughtful people. And we believe that connecting with the common backyard animals, and I'm speaking for my wife and me and our philosophy behind our publishing company, if you connect kids with what's in their own backyards, and they love those animals, they will eventually turn into environmentalists. So I'm not here to preach an environmental message, instead to say, get out, love nature, and things will take care of themselves.
Perfect. David, thank you again so much for the generosity of your time and your talent. And thank you everyone for joining us for this artist talk by David FitzSimmons as a part of our programming for the exhibition. It's an honor to be here. I'd like to give a special thank you to the curators, Maddie and Maria. A big thank you to all the other participating artists, as well as the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.